Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. Now for today's video, I wanted to talk about the differences between Pteranodon variants in the Jurassic Park franchise. So, for many years now, the dinosaurs and extinct animals that we get to see in the Jurassic movies have been classified in a pretty interesting way. Ever since I was a kid, there has been this sort of inclination to split up dinosaur color schemes and physical traits in only two unique categories. Either the animal is a male or the animal is a female. Depending on what the characteristics and attributes of that dinosaur might be, you'd put it into one of the two categories. Well, if we go back in time through all of these movies and do just a little bit of detective work, I think it becomes blatantly clear that this doesn't really make sense anymore. In fact, it hasn't made sense or really even been a thing for a long time now. If you've been following some of my more recent videos, you've probably heard me talk about the variations in Pteranodon designs that have popped up in the series over these last 2 decades. And the reason I've done that and really kept bringing it up is because there's a lot that hasn't really been discussed when it comes to this animal and how it fits into the Jurassic Park universe. From the outside looking in, you just see a big winged pterosaur that flies around and does some cool stuff in the movies. But even upon just a very minor inspection at how varied and unique each depiction of the animal has been, a lot of questions start to form in what I'd assume would be a very dedicated fan's mind. The first depiction of the Pteranodon that we ever see on screen in the Jurassic Park series was shown at the very end of The Lost World. These animals have a lot of characteristics and features that are unique to only themselves when you compare and contrast them to what came shortly after. Such attributes would include the very flexible swan-like neck and notable blue coloration on the reptile's body. Also, a clear lack of teeth is plainly visible when watching the Lost World's credits roll. As far as we know, these animals have been free and living on Isla Sorna ever since Site B was evacuated around the time of Hurricane Clarissa's landfall. And since this was, at the time, the only depiction of a Pteranodon on screen, it can be pretty safe to assume that this is the version of the animal that would have been bred for implementation into John Hammond's Jurassic Park. Well, things get a little complicated when you fast forward a few years into Jurassic Park 3, because this movie establishes a very different backstory and characterization for the animals that has, unfortunately, never been fully explained. You see, the free Pteranodons that we saw fly over the herds of stegosaurs at the end of The Lost World are now contrasted with this much different looking group of pterosaurs that have yet to be let out of their cage. The aviary and its machinations in JP3 pretty clearly tell us that these animals have not been living on their own in the wilds of Sorna for the last few years. In fact, the movie makes it very clear that this group of Pteranodons have been stuck hunting and fishing in their aviary for quite some time, probably ever since everyone left the island. It's here where we get to see these striking differences between these animals and their more docile counterparts. These pterosaurs come complete with beaks full of teeth. Their color schemes are vastly different from the versions of The Lost World, and their aggression towards humans seem to be at an all-time series high. Since they've been locked up in their aviary for so long, this is one of the many things that really dispels the simple theory that all Jurassic Park dinosaurs can just be segregated into male and female groups. Here we see a clearly different version of the same animal that has quite a lot of unique physical traits and an alibi for being kept separated from their Lost World kin. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, this differentiation has never been explained in the series up to this current point in time. However, it was something that was actually talked about and discussed during the development of JP3.
The Pteranodon is one of the things that Hammond's company was doing without telling anybody about it. They were hatching a lot of different dinosaurs that they didn't admit to, and when they moved out, they basically left the cages open and everybody got on the boats and planes and got out of there as quick as they could. So there are a lot of things running around that nobody knows about.
Oh my God.
Joe Johnston's words here suggest that the Pteranodons that we see in the third movie aren't really supposed to be taken as the same sort of individuals that we saw in The Lost World. Originally, I do know that there were plans to include dialogue from Alan Grant that these animals were not on InGen's list, but since that doesn't really make any sense and kind of contradicts the previous movie, it was probably for the best that they cut that line out. Nevertheless, Jurassic Park 3 establishes that there is a separate, more toothy, and far more monstrous strand of the species living quarantined on the island during the events of the third film. As far as why they were kept locked away and why they were bred so differently from the others, we honestly do not know. Clearly something is going on here that has led to these clones being drastically different from what we saw flying happily around Site B in The Lost World. But when you get down to what the actual goal or even genetic makeup of this animal is in canon, there isn't exactly a concrete answer. Now, I do find it interesting that much later in the film continuity's timeline, we do get to see Masrani's Jurassic World Pteranodons, which look far different from either of their earlier predecessors. In fact, these new clones feature the shorter head crest that is paleontologically known to exist in female animals of the same species. And their beaks look far different from what we saw in JP 2 and 3 as well. But there isn't really any sort of reason that we've been given as to why these guys look so different from their earlier counterparts. The only acceptable answer that I personally subscribe to is the one that's the most obvious, and that's the fact that you cannot simply differentiate these clones as being a part of either sex. Variations in genetic versions have existed in this franchise ever since Jurassic Park 3. The Pteranodon is just the one that's the most easily identifiable in that film. And if we're talking about behind-the-scenes info, let's not forget that both the older Geostern-Bergia design and a white-colored pycnofiber variant of the Lost World Pteranodon almost made it into the second film. Despite neither of these designs being canon, it too is important to talk about. The one truth that I think people should take away from this video, as well as the franchise as a whole, is that we don't really have an answer as to what happened to the Pteranodons in the Jurassic Park series. At least, not yet anyways. We know that at some point down the line, the Pteranodons were most definitely not a blatantly clear species with a collectively unified set of traits. These are different versions of the same animal. They aren't all just specific clones that came out the same by InGen. Genetically speaking, there is something that clearly sets them apart from their brothers and sisters. We just don't know why they were created like this. It's all a mystery at this point. Whether they be earlier versions or failed experiments, that's all fan theories and headcanon stuff, any of which could be true, but there isn't really any evidence to support a clear-cut answer just yet. At this given point in time, the Pteranodons exhibit an obvious case of genetic tampering. What that means for Hammond's research and development on Jurassic Park, we may never really know. Now before I go, I'd like to thank all of my game wardens, as well as all of my InGen executives. I'd also like to thank all of my park workers and InGen hunters as well. Guys, it seriously means the world to me that you all continue to support what I do, and I never want you to ever forget that. Now I'd like to thank you all for watching today's video. If you feel like I deserve it, I'd appreciate the like and hope that you'll all consider subscribing if you're interested in hearing from me again. See you all in the next video, guys, and as always, take it easy.